Here we go.
Good evening. Welcome to the final Mahone Bay Town Council regular meeting for December and 2021. We have a full complement of councillors. We have some staff with us tonight. And we do have some citizens at home who have joined us on YouTube. And we have a couple of people who'll be doing presentations as well. Am I hearing the wrong?
It's fine. We're good, Jim.
Okay, we're good. We'll begin by acknowledging that we are gathered today in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral, present, and future territory of the Mi'kmaq people. Today, we gather with the intent followed by the living peace and friendship treaties with respect, cooperation, and coexistence. Council members, you have an agenda that was emailed to you. What is your wish with the agenda? Councillor Feeney.
Mayor, I understand that there was an additional item in camera item on personnel. To be,
Yes.
with that amendment, I'd approve that we approve the motion, approve the agenda.
Okay. Seconded by Councillor Carver. You've heard the motion. Approved as presented with the amendment to include an in-camera session on HR. All in favor? Motion is carried. Thank you. Let's now go to the minutes of the regular meeting of November 25th, 2021. Council? Councillor Wilson.
Move that the minutes be approved as circulated.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder? I'll get it.
Turn the mute around to him.
And that's what we do.
Councillor Burdick, that's it. Yeah. Seniors moment. The first thing I want to say is Councillor Ellis. Apologies. Councillor Burdick seconds that. You've heard the motion to accept the minutes as presented. All in favor? The motion is carried. Thank you. We have two presentations tonight. The first one is with Louis Desgrossiers and Jill Johnson, NeoThermal energy storage, and they're going to talk about their storage, the feasibility study that they did for their technology in the town of Mahone Bay. Mr. Grossier.
Okay, looks like something needs to be enabled for my screen sharing.
Staff are doing it even as we speak, Mr. Grossier.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There we have it.
Okay.
Okay, and you should see that full screen now. Right, and I will begin. Just a moment. So it's a pleasure to be back today before council. My name is Louis Desgrossiers, CEO of NeoThermal Energy Storage in Bridgewater. And allow me now to provide background on our collaboration with the town of Mahone Bay and to share findings from a recently completed feasibility study representing the use of our product, NeoThermal ETS, in oil-heated homes in the community. NeoThermal ETS is a supplemental off-peak electric thermal storage appliance that integrates directly with either hot water or hot air central heating systems to shift fuel use to clean electricity, turning these into net zero ready hybrid heating systems. NeoThermal ETS is a modular system typically consisting of 4 modules that would be installed in or near the utility room in the home and fully automates both the demand response functions as well as the heat delivery from either the ETS or home's boiler or furnace. In January 2020, we presented to council our desire to partner on a community home retrofit pilot project. Since this time, we've worked with Mahone Bay staff to develop pilot project scope and identify suitable funding opportunities to advance the project, such as those from the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. Community home retrofit pilot project funding from FCM is contingent on demonstrating by feasibility study that the project is anticipated to achieve at least 10% reductions in both whole home energy use and GHG emissions. A feasibility study with Dalhousie University's Drs. Lucas Swan and Nathaniel Pear was made possible by funding from NeoThermal, Mahone Bay, and ACOA. In-kind assistance to the project was also provided by NRCan, CanMed Energy Ottawa, for building energy simulation software tools, as well as data of Mahone Bay's electricity system provided by AREA on behalf of the town. The study aimed to characterize 3 archetypal, exclusively oil-heated single-family homes in Mahone Bay in increments of size from average to larger to largest. The study evaluated the impacts of using NeoThermal ETS on whole home energy use and GHG emissions, as well as the cost of energy to the homeowner. The study also considered the combination of NeoThermal ETS with an electric hot water tank conversion from oil to further amplify impacts on whole home energy use and GHGs. As mentioned earlier, the objective was to determine with some confidence the ability to reduce both whole home energy use and GHGs each by at least 10%. These were selected as pass-fail criteria. Additionally, the grid impacts of a mass deployment of these technologies into 41 of Mahone Bay's approximately 60 fully oil-heated homes were evaluated. These looked at individual and combined impacts of NeoThermal ETS and electric domestic hot water conversions on the town's energy sales and monthly peak loads, each representing utility revenues and costs. Data from Mahone Bay energy surveys, electricity meters, and the property registry were used to identify ranges of characteristics such as age, size, and energy use of homes in Mahone Bay, resulting in 3 archetypal homes shown in this table. These data were then used to specify a home energy model in Transys that could be used to simulate the dynamic performance of both NeoThermal ETS and an electric hot water tank. The above average daily electricity use profiles were generated using these models. The low and steady blue line near the bottom of each graph indicates the nearly unchanging hourly electricity use in oil-heated homes. The red line in each graph indicates the hourly electricity use from using NeoThermal ETS for space heating, indicating a strong ability to restrict energy use to off-peak and mid-peak periods. The yellow line, topmost in each graph, indicates the hourly electricity use from using both NeoThermal ETS and an electric hot water tank, showing deviations from the strongly regimented profile of the ETS by itself, reducing the potential for net cost savings to the homeowner and increasing peak demand on the grid. These results highlight the opportunity to improve the interconnection of NeoThermal ETS with electric hot water tanks to improve their on-peak avoidance. When used for space heating only, the study found that NeoThermal ETS could not by itself reduce whole home energy use by 10%, but could, however, reduce GHG emissions by over 15%. This was anticipated as there is less opportunity for efficiency gains in central heating in comparison to domestic hot water. For comparison, a typical oil furnace operates with 80% annual fuel efficiency, while an oil-heated domestic hot water tank operates with less than 50% efficiency. The study also confirmed our own assessment of fuel shifting 74 to 91% of fuel oil used for space heating, and cost savings of up to $1,000 per year when oil prices are high. When combining NeoThermal ETS with an electric hot water tank, the study found that both 10% whole home energy and GHG reductions could be exceeded for all home archetypes. The additional fuel shifting from the conversion to an electric hot water tank contributed an additional 21 to 32% to NeoThermal ETS's already 50 to 54% fuel shifting. Energy cost savings would also increase in all three home archetypes, but could be further improved with enhanced ETS integration with the electric hot water tank to shift a greater proportion of electricity use to lower cost off-peak periods. Respecting the anticipated operational impacts to the municipal utility, the study found that NeoThermal ETS was the most favorable electrification solution by virtue of increasing electricity sales at a higher ratio to monthly peak load increases in comparison to both electric hot water tank conversions exclusively or ETS together with electric hot water tank conversions. Confirmed now by the results of the feasibility study, Mahone Bay's staff and NeoThermal are working together to identify funding opportunities for a community pilot project demonstrating the performance of NeoThermal ETS in combination with an electric hot water tank conversion. To this end, NeoThermal is actively raising private capital for its contribution to the pilot project and to build market delivery capacity. Furthermore, NeoThermal is exploring additional in-kind and financial partnerships to further supplement project financing and possible grant leveraging. Thank you all for your attention. Questions are now welcome.
Questions? Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I guess my only question is, this module that you described earlier is basically just a thermal storage unit, is that correct?
It is, yes. So it consumes off-peak electricity to generate heat and then stores it chemically within our heat storage cells, and then delivers that to the heating system.
Okay. So the second piece of that question then is, for savings to accrue, the home would have to be equipped with a smart meter, and we would have to have a lower rate of electricity off hours. Is that correct?
Yes, and that rate is already on the books for the municipal utility. It's a seldom used rate, but the UARB does have already an approved ETS rate for the Mahone Bay utility.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, Councillor Kerr.
Yes, thank you for the presentation. What would be the cost of a unit to a homeowner?
Yes, and thank you for that question. The anticipated cost to a homeowner would be, for a typical 4-module system, would be around $10,000. And this would be comparable to a whole home equivalent installation of a heat pump system.
Councillor Feeney.
Thank you, Louis. I appreciated the presentation. I think we've seen you on a number of occasions over the last 2 years, so it's nice to see that you're keeping the trains on track. Or do you think, I was a bit surprised that there are only 60 oil heated homes in town. I guess that's good news, but are you confident that you can find, your next tranche of trial participants as you go through this next stage in Mahone Bay? Or are you going to have to go a little further afield to get the right configuration of participants?
No, that's a great question. In partnering with the town utility and going after FCM financing, it would have to be confined to the municipality of Mahone Bay. 60 homes were just those that we could definitively identify as being exclusively oil heated for both the domestic hot water and space heating. There are a larger number of homes that have a mix, so that may have oil space heating, but electric hot water. So, which is why those numbers are much smaller when we exclusively look at those that use nothing other than oil. The number may be a bit larger because that was also just obtained by cross-reference of the town survey with utility data. So there is some uncertainty there as well. The number could be higher, but the 60 homes is just what we can determine with confidence.
Okay. CAO.
So Louis, my understanding is the modeling all use current energy balance. So as we get our solar garden online, it will further enhance the GHG, resulting GHG reductions with this type of a unit. Is that correct?
Correct. And also that is factoring in the GHG intensity of energy imports that are presently conducted through New Brunswick Power. So then if the plans are still to shift those energy imports to another utility with an even lower GHG intensity, then those GHG savings become even greater. And of course, yes, with the addition of the solar garden.
Okay. Councillor Carver.
Thank you. I have a question about the estimated lifetime of the units.
Yes. So we anticipate that these units would have a design life of at least 15 years, but we're planning on having them designed for pretty much the same life expectancy as a furnace or a boiler, that if well maintained, it should remain operational for 20, perhaps even 30 years. But our minimum objective would be a 15-year lifetime at this stage, just because there are uncertainties until we get more of these things out in the field. But in comparison to other systems, ours has little to no mechanical wear. So we feel pretty confident in being able to achieve a long equipment lifetime.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, Al?
Yeah.
Councillor Burke.
Yeah, thank you so much for the presentation. I can't say I'm a new council member anymore because I've been here for a year, but I think that a lot of the conversation happened before this present council came in. So it's interesting to see the progress with it, and I'm looking forward to the next stage. It seems like a really smart co-venture for sure. So thank you.
Thank you. And we're very excited about working with the town on this.
And we look forward to the next opportunity for you to come back and to share with us the progress of the study that you're involved with. Louis and Jill, thank you both for being able to join us tonight. And we'll see you in the new year.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and all of council.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Thank you
Happy
for your
holidays.
time. Good night.
Okay. Well, let's move on to our second presentation from James Renouf, who's going to talk about a proposed development on Y Street. Evening, Mr. Renouf. You're on mute, sir.
Mute. There we go. Good evening, folks. Nice to see everyone. Yeah, so I guess my understanding is that folks have had an opportunity to have a peek at the presentation that we've come up with. I don't know if I'll necessarily go through that tonight, but I'll start by introducing myself. My name's Jamie Renouf, and this is my partner, Kelly Humphreys. I am the owner of the lot up at the end of, I guess you called it Y Street. We could call it Welcome Street. It's a lot 2 Clearland Road on the books, I think. But in any event, we're looking to try to do something with it. So my father actually had a survey done a number of years ago, and we kind of established some lot divisions there that might work. And really, it's been hard to get off the ground because there's a significant amount of land in between our 27 acres and the end of Y/Welcome Street. So the problem has been that getting kind of across there. So we do have an easement in place that gives us permission to cross the trail. But it's kind of just been cost prohibitive. Obviously, it's a significant amount of ground to get across. Recently, we have decided to pursue a private practice with Kelly Humphreys. My partner here is a school psychologist. And we're looking to build a building on the land that will serve as home for the new child psychology practice. So that's what we're here to speak to you about tonight. So I've spoken to Mr. Hyde and Mr. Uhlman, and Heather Archibald suggested that the next step might be to discuss with you guys the possibility of a zone amendment allowing us to build a slightly larger building, commercial structure, that than the current bylaw allows. My understanding is that it's 750 square feet interior and a little over 2,000 square feet, including the exterior usage. And we'd be looking to build a building somewhere in the neighborhood of 2,000 to 2,500 square feet with enough parking to kind of service that building, maybe kind of 10 to 15 spots, that kind of thing. So yeah, so we're here today to ask for that zone amendment.
Okay. Comments? Questions? Deputy Mayor?
Hey, hi, Jim.
Hi.
Hi, Kelly. It's a question and a comment in many ways. I was pretty excited in the first place when I'd seen the initial plan and layout for the piece of land. As somebody who's, I guess, very interested in affordable housing, I was thinking, well, great place for us to think about, can we get more homes in Mahone Bay? So I guess the question for me is, if you go down this route that you've chosen now, does that sort of in many ways limit the potential for that piece of land to be used for I guess the initial plan that had been mentioned somewhere? And I don't know, maybe it's a staff view kind of question, but that's a question that's coming to my mind right now.
Yeah, so basically when we initially did the division of the land, we looked at doing it with service lots, and that was just incredibly cost prohibitive. And then we looked at a smaller, dividing it into 11 lots that are significantly larger lots, allowing for us to be able to keep them as unserviced lots with enough land to be able to have on-site sewer. So basically, like I said, this whole thing is trying to get this land off the ground. And really, I think this opportunity with the potential for the private practice is a way to get in there, right? So the idea is that my hope is that we get in there with the road, and then further develop the rest of the lots with housing. I own a number of apartment buildings, and I know that affordable housing is a huge issue right now. And it's definitely something that has been the front of my mind for the last year or so. And it's definitely something I'd be interested in pursuing with the remainder of the lots available. And I don't think that, although this is going to be a commercial structure, it's not going to appear to be a commercial structure. We're actually working with Kelly's brother, who is an architect in Newfoundland. He's received a lot of kind of nationwide acclaim. He builds really interesting structures that fit into the environment in which they're built. So the idea is that this, would be a place of, safety and calm and mindfulness where it fits into the environment around it. So I think it wouldn't kind of stand out, and it wouldn't necessarily inhibit the possibility of future residential development.
Councillor Burdick.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for the presentation, and it's really interesting to see this, the plans there. I did notice in your introduction there, and also just now how you're talking about this sort of low profile building, and I'm not sure if this is the place to do it, but I am so curious to see what that would look like, because that is, I think that's sort of an ongoing concern with development in general, is how to make things fit in well. And I too am also very hopeful that there will be the possibility of some housing stock that could happen there. Maybe even, you know, this is a future sort of question, but if there is an architect who's interested in working with Mahone Bay on sort of those sorts of things, it would be very interesting to see how it works in that context, and if there are future possibilities if it gets to that point.
Yeah, it's definitely of interest of mine as well. Yeah.
Councillor Carver.
Yes, thank you. I confess that I'm a little confused about what is being asked of council here, and I might have to turn to the CAO for clarification about what specifically is being asked of council in terms of a change to accommodate this. And I before we go there, I want to say I'm delighted to think of that land over there, the possibility of development there. With all the potential for affordable housing. That's great. So congratulations on getting it going.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I guess maybe I'll comment first, and maybe someone who knows a little bit more can jump in. So basically, I've spoken to Mr. Hyde and Mr. Ullman, and Ms. Archibald actually is the one who suggested that a zone amendment would be necessary in order to pursue this idea, because the current residential on service bylaws only allow me to build a building of 750 square feet, and I just don't think that's going to be sufficient for our needs. So we just need a little bit bigger building.
Councillor Payne.
Sorry, I'll defer to the CAO if you have some.
Just Dave, answering Councillor Carver's question. So Jamie, when you talked to Heather, was her advice that you subdivide the property as a part of this zoning change, or change the zoning on the entire lot?
Oh, excellent question. I don't think we got into specifics there, but I certainly am only interested in one lot being commercial.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, Heather would be the one to speak to the sequence. I think you would be considering simultaneously, as we've been able to do in the past, the subdivision and the zoning change. So it's to say, you know, only that what is proposed lot 1 on the map would be looking, that's the correct one, is it, Jamie?
Correct.
Yeah, would be looking for commercial. So that would require a change in zoning and would permit commercial activity. So it's not specific to this proposal. As a zoning change, it would enable any usage that would be accepted in the commercial zone. And just in terms of that neighborhood, you know, obviously there's commercial activities on Main Street, but traditionally at the corner of Y and Welcome Street, for those who've been around for a while, you may remember there actually is a traditionally commercially zoned property, just converted away from commercial to a residence, but the Burgoyne warehouse up there was always a commercially zoned property.
Councillor Feeney.
So thank you very much, Jamie, for the presentation. I think it's fair to say that, you know, this council and councils in the past are kind of well aware of the efforts that you and your father before you have had with regard to that property and some of the complexities around some of the ideas that you've had in the past and the challenges of trying to get it to a point where you could actually develop it. And it's pretty hard to look at the town map and not notice that big block of 27 acres that's sitting there empty. So, you know, I think, you know, council in the context of the land use bylaws that are under review now are kind of well aware of that property. And, you know, I think that as we pass this along to the planners and to the PAC for evaluation and then recommendations back to council, you know, personally, I think council will be very appreciative of your forthcomingness about the fact that you may need an anchor tenant to make the economics of the overall project and the road across the railway track. So certainly there's a financial reality of what you as an investor would need to do to make that land, to put that land in a position to do the whole project, the whole 11 lots. So, you know, I think we're all look forward to seeing your next steps. And, you know, you have to take a deep breath when you're making that kind of investment. So we certainly respect your efforts, and we'll look forward to seeing your next steps.
Councillor now.
Yeah, Jamie, I was just wondering, you mentioned about talking to Heather Archibald and that. Have you actually started the formal process of asking for the change, or not? Because it has to go through the planners and the PAV, so.
No, I thought I'd get with you guys first and see what happens. Yeah. Get some advice
just to-
really about how to proceed.
Just to make sure everybody's on the same page, and Heather probably did walk you through this. There's a pretty basic form to complete to request a change. And what we do is if you do put that in at the next meeting of council, we'd officially initiate the process, which schedules a public information meeting at which the planning staff and yourselves would present this concept to the general public in order to ensure the community members are aware of it and also to gather feedback that may come in. Then the planning advisory committee meets to consider the planner's report. In light of that public feedback, they have a conversation, and if at that point there may be some additional questions raised by PAC, once they're in a position to do so, if they feel it is appropriate to do so, the PAC will make a recommendation to council that council move ahead with the zoning change. And at that point, if council accepts that recommendation, I know this seems like quite a bit of procedure, we would schedule a hearing, which essentially gives that final opportunity for any residents who feel strongly to come out and make a comment, and then council has the final decision. So it is a bit of a slow process. If you get in the application for it, we would begin this in January. I think Heather usually advises that it can take up to 4 months to complete that process, but that would at least mean that by the spring you'd presumably have an answer as to whether the rezoning was permitted. And then within that, you have a lot of flexibility. It's not like a development agreement. If the rezoning happens, you'd be operating as of right. You wouldn't need to talk to the staff and council anymore, just Heather at that point.
Okay.
Sounds good.
James, when earlier on you suggested that of the 27 acres that your property comprises, one lot would be identified as commercial and the rest would be residential. But I thought you also commented that you were intending to leave the lots larger so as to not require municipal sewage connections, but rather you could do a well and a septic system. And so how many lots, building lots, does that mean your property would provide for residential purposes?
Well, potentially the other 10. So the current subdivision plan has 11 lots.
Okay.
And we're planning on using lot number 1 as the commercial venture.
Okay. So lots 2 through 11 would be purely residential purposes.
Correct, yes.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor.
Yeah. So in the case that council would, and I'm hypothetical here, that you would be in a position to get access to water and sewer, how many more units would we be, plots would you be able to cover there? Do you have an idea?
I'd have to look at the numbers, but the current lot sizes are enormous. And, you know, I think with water and sewer, it would only require, I think it's 7,000 feet, if I remember correctly. So it would multiply the number of lots by many times.
And will that be of interest to you?
Absolutely. Absolutely. But like I said, the costs involved, because at that point, really, you're talking about a paved road, sidewalks, and all the rest. And I think it's just hundreds of thousands of dollars.
You can dream, you can dream.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions? No further questions. James, thank you very much for your discussion this evening. I'm sure everyone on council looks forward to the next opportunity to hear some more detail, a bit of some additional concrete structure, no pun intended, to what you're going to do with that land. So thank you very much, and I would encourage you to stay in touch with the CAO and his staff and get the next piece of the puzzle to council in the new year, early in the new year.
Will do. We'll get on it. Thanks very much for your time, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Happy holidays. See you later.
Okay. Let's go to the next item on the agenda. Correspondence. We have two things for action. One from the Lunenburg County Senior Safety Partnership and one from Christine McClare, who is Region 6. Who will speak? Councillor Carver.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. I would like to speak to item 4.1, the request from the Lunenburg County Senior Safety Partnership Society for the municipality of the town of Mahone Bay to support its request to the province for an indication of stable funding, but more importantly, increased funding. And as has been laid out in the letter, the society will be approaching municipalities within the next month or so, asking for an increase of the current funding that's provided by the municipalities. There hasn't been an increase since 2018, and that is the only increase that there has been since 2014. And certain full recognition that the municipalities would certainly prefer to see some increase coming from the province as well before considering an increase themselves. So I would like to make a motion that the town of Mahone Bay, the council of the town of Mahone Bay, write to the minister, the Honorable Barbara Adams, indicating its support for the request of the Lunenburg County Senior Safety Partnership Society for stable and increased funding, as outlined in the letter.
Councilor Burdick
I
seconds
will
it?
second that motion.
Okay. On the question. All in favor? Motion is carried. Thank you.
Thank you.
Not for the motion, but just in terms of the letter that says we should anticipate an increase, a request of an increase. Is there any idea how much of an increase will be?
The increase that we have asked for would take the form of funding based on certain factors like geography, the area that has to be covered, the population, and the demonstrated activity of the current service, so that would be a funding formula. And at the moment, there is no indication that we even have any funding coming in 2022. So we're having to budget on the basis of just not knowing at all. And it's partly because of the transition of the government, but it's also because this particular ball got dropped somehow before the government changed. So it's kind of complicated. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Okay, let's move on to the note from Christine McClare at Region 6 on solid waste management. CAO, were you planning to?
Yeah, I
Enlighten
think
us?
so. I didn't realize, and my apologies, that the actual budget document isn't attached to this. Some of you would have had a chance to review that document as part of Region 6, but for any that haven't, like if there's a preference to include that in the package and defer it, that wouldn't be trouble. But it's essentially a stand pat budget. I don't think there's any significant change to it in this year, and typically we just under the intermunicipal for Region 6, all of the councils are required to approve the budget, although it doesn't require all of them to be binding, as it says in the fine print. So we're being asked to accept the budget that has already passed through the Region 6 intermunicipal committee.
Okay.
And like I said, I actually didn't realize, well, okay, we do have, sorry, but I guess we do have the budget in there. I just opened this and I wasn't getting past the first page. So anybody have any questions about the budget there, I can take them back to Christine. But otherwise, we're looking for a motion to approve the budget. My apologies there. I don't know why I wasn't getting the rest of the document.
Councillor Wilson.
I move that we accept that budget of Region 6 Solid Waste Management Group as presented.
Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Now. On the question? All in favor? That motion is carried. Thank you. Councillor Burdick, I thought you
Thank
were
you.
putting your hand up.
I know, Mike, sorry, Your Honor, Your Worship. We'll get our names right soon, but Dave, yeah.
Yeah.
I understand it's not quite a boilerplate situation, but I feel more comfortable seeing a budget before I.
Yeah, I really misspoke because for some reason I wasn't getting past the first page. But if you scroll down, there is actually the budget document. So
Okay,
that's essentially what we've got.
okay, so there weren't any additional.
No, this was
documents
the
to,
document.
okay.
I just wasn't seeing past the letter, and I'm
Okay.
sorry for the confusion.
All right, because I thought maybe there was additional information.
I know I looked at this. I just thought for a second it didn't get to the rest of you. It sometimes happens with the package. So
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, let's go to item 5, correspondence for information. And we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 items. What is your wish, Councillor Burdick?
Thank you. I think with the letter from 5.1 from David Brumwell about the proposed development on Claremont Street, that as we've done with other letters, to forward to the planners.
To the PAC?
Yes.
Motion is to forward item 5.1 to the PAC, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. On the question, all in favor? The motion is carried. Now, what about 5.2 through 5.5? Councillor Carver.
Your worship, I also had a question about 5.4, and a question that I circulated earlier today. Could we direct staff to find out or determine who the representatives are that have been appointed to the working group for the code of conduct process?
To establish the regulations?
Yes, does that require a motion to, or?
Councillor Wilson?
I'm just trying to ask you, you're asking for names or the groups?
The names,
Okay.
who are the
I think the
people,
memo indicates the groups that are going to be involved.
and it's stated that the members have already been appointed, but did not identify
Who
who the members are,
are.
which groups they were representing, so we don't know which, who's representing our area. We don't know that.
Understand?
So to the question, but does it require a motion? Wouldn't require a motion for staff to look into it and get back to council. If you wanted it to be something that was reported to a council meeting and a public agenda, then I would say doing a motion is a good idea just to create that accountability. But we can just send you an email, because I already did have your question about it. So that's up to you. If this is just a question you're asking of staff, we'll get you an answer. If it's a direction to confirm the names on the next meeting agenda, we can do that.
I'm happy to leave it as a question to
Okay.
staff. Thank you for
Thank
that
you.
clarification.
Okay. So,
Hearing that, I would move that we receive and file 5.2 to 5.5.
thank you. Seconded by Councillor Carver. You've heard the motion on the question. All in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Let's go to staff reports. CAO, staff report to council. This is the only one for December.
This is the only one for December, the longest kind of period that we have between the full document being updated, but we'll certainly have more to report as a result. For now, happy to take questions on the updated assignments to staff part or any of the other stuff that maybe you didn't notice last time, and if any questions have arisen. So, any questions?
Questions for the CAO? Councillor Burke.
Thank you. I don't have any questions at this time, but I just wanted to remark that I was really happy to see the speed humps go in. I noticed them this afternoon when I was driving back, and that they're there now.
Did you try them out?
I did, because I drove over them slowly.
That's well, that's good.
And so they're very effective. That was nice to see. That felt like a speedy turnaround in some ways.
Good, yeah, we even anticipate, we'll say officially, provincial funding on those. So pretty good turnaround in that respect as well. Yeah, thank you. Glad to hear that.
A lot of positive.
We're concerned we weren't going to get the weather. Last week, obviously, is when we had initially hoped to do them. Was not the kind of week to do them, but we got the weather, so I'm glad we were able to do that.
So will we
They
have
should
a
be
sign that
finished,
says
tomorrow.
these humps funded by the province of Nova Scotia?
That'll be up to them. If they want to make an announcement, they can make an announcement.
I think we should have one.
Yeah, that's
But
right.
we will, there's 2 more to go in, 2.5, I guess, to finish
Get a
tomorrow.
total of
Right.
5.
There's 6.
Oh, so we could have this hump in honor of.
Yeah.
But thank you. Councilor.
Thank you, CAO. Other questions or comments?
Except for information.
I would say if we can have a motion to accept for information purposes, Councillor Feeney, do we have a seconder? Councillor Wilson, you've heard that motion. All in favor? Motion is carried. Let's go to the staff report on signage policy.
So this one is back on the agenda after having been council and back staff looking for some confirmation of areas for municipal election signage on town premises. And we did review a number of locations, presenting, I guess, the maximal list. I know we could just pick one. So looking for some feedback from council to hopefully confirm that list of locations or narrow it down. And then if that is sufficient change, then we'd also be looking for approval of the policy because it was introduced at a previous meeting. It has now been seen by council sufficiently. And I'll take any questions.
Councillor Feeney.
Mayor, I think this has improved quite a bit. I move that council adopt the signage policy as presented.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder? Deputy Mayor seconds. You've heard the motion. On the question. All in favor? Motion is carried. Thank you. Let's go to the vaccination policy.
So another policy that's back on the agenda, this one was presented at your last meeting and there were a number of suggested changes. I can just quickly run through because there were a number of different changes. References to boards were removed because we don't have any boards that we're responsible for. We just have other boards that we sit on. We also reviewed the definition of fully vaccinated, and I know there was some discussion about the naming of vaccines and things. However, this definition does actually not rely on the complete naming of all the vaccines. What it talks about is the types of vaccines that are in use, and those vaccines being that there being a demonstration, this is an addition, that the copy of COVID vaccination record that would be acceptable to the province be produced. So what we're trying to say here is that fully vaccinated is a definition that can evolve if additional vaccines come on the market. But depending on the type of vaccine, we have a standard way of assessing whether someone has been fully vaccinated with that vaccine. And that will line up with what the province is doing as well. And then the final change was around the specification for previously, we just said, anyone failing to, this is 4.3, anyone failing to comply with the requirements would have the same consequence. Now it's been moderated to make a distinction between employees, volunteers, members of the Mahone Bay and District Fire Department, and council and committee members. And I believe that's reflective of council's discussion at the last meeting. I did want to make an additional note here. I didn't change in this draft the effective date of the policy when it was presented at our last meeting. Was presented with an effective date of January 31st. I was talking to Angela earlier this week, our UNO coordinator, and she was pointing out to me that in fact, it would not currently be possible if we adopt this policy tonight for a fully unvaccinated person to arrange, receive both courses of vaccination and have a 2-week buffer to count as fully vaccinated by January 31st. And that's based on the fact that this was introduced in November. It's now mid-December. So her recommendation is that we would set the effective date as February 28th. That's her recommendation to ensure that people would have time. So I would make that further change if council is inclined to adopt this policy tonight. I'd suggest adopting it as amended to reflect that change of effective date. And does anyone have any questions about what's presented?
Councillor Carver?
So I do have a question about section 2.0, where it mentions that the vaccination policy would apply to those who are working remotely. So I'm just curious about why that is specifically mentioned. Just because I have the image of somebody who's working remotely is not infectious to the workplace. So why is that specifically mentioned?
It's specifically mentioned because this policy applies to all employees. And we are in a situation where we support remote work, but that does not provide an alternative path for an employee who perhaps doesn't want to get fully vaccinated. So essentially, this clause is there to close the door on the notion that an accommodation could be provided by an employee just saying, oh, well, I'll work remotely then, don't worry about me. I don't need to prove my vaccination status. I'm going to work remotely. That's not an option. However, staff will sometimes work remotely. They do still have to follow with this policy.
That clarifies it. That being said, I'd be prepared to make a motion to accept the draft as presented except for the change of the February 28th effective date.
Okay. Seconded by Councillor Burdick. Do you have a comment?
Yes, I do. Well, since we had this conversation, one of the things I had discomfort when we first discussed it, and I was trying to figure out where my discomfort is coming from. And I think I have nailed it, and then I sort of wanted to mention this as we go around approving this. I think vaccination mandates. I'm fully vaccinated. My family is. My wife is, and my kids hopefully will get to that state. But as somebody who works in mental health and addictions, I feel very strongly about mandating vaccines in the sense that, from my perspective, there's government overreach in it, and we as local government, we are also overreaching in this particular space. So I won't support the policy as it is, because I think that's not something that we should mandate from a principle perspective. I understand that we need to up vaccination rates, but I think the way as a country and as a province we have communicated that to the public has created a situation whereby there's a lot of misleading information about what vaccines do, and there's groups and folks who have chosen not to be vaccinated because of the misinformation that's provided around vaccinations being the reason why we'll open up, vaccinations being in many ways would prevent you from getting COVID. And so I guess in principle, we've created a situation where there's a group of people now who are being seen as, some are called anti-vaxxers, are being seen as the other. And then that othering, for me, I think I'm against completely. I don't think that's the way we should be approaching, I guess, a COVID response. There are better ways to do it, and I don't think a vaccine mandate would be the best way to do that. If we're trying to reduce the spread, testing from a public health perspective and evidence-informed perspective, testing and very frequent testing would be the best way to go. So if we want to ensure that staff don't spread COVID, ensuring that they get tested would be the best way to do it. They can be vaccinated, they can get COVID, they can come into the office with COVID and be fully vaccinated. If we don't get them to be tested, we would have addressed it. So from that perspective, I think I'll not be supporting the policy. And I know that it's something that has happened, I guess, at provincial level and across the board in many different areas, but there has to be, I guess, a conversation about if we're a democratic society, then should we be in a place where we're mandating vaccines? And if we're doing that, are we actually doing very democratic?
Councillor Wilson.
I'd just like to comment that I'm old enough to remember all of those exact same arguments about seatbelts, and bicycle helmets, and motorcycle helmets.
And I think if your decision to not get vaccinated, like your decision not to wear seatbelts and motorcycle helmets, only injures you and no one else, go ahead. I think you're free to make that decision. But the person who chooses to not be vaccinated may infect a young person or a senior citizen or a next door neighbor, and they themselves may never be sick with it. So anyway, Councillor Berg, you had a comment?
Yes, this is something that has definitely crossed my mind is messaging. And I think that might be the issue. But I don't know how not having this particular level of mandate in our own municipal unit would change the fact that people are not receiving the right information. The idea that I feel like I've seen a lot of messaging from the province in particular about how, no, yes, you can still get COVID, you can still pass it on, even if you are vaccinated. However, given that it's much reduced in terms of how badly you will be feeling it and how the amount that you'll be passing it on to other people. As somebody who has a vulnerable person in my own household, I'm particularly aware of this. And I think that there has to be that balance. I also know historically in my family, I had a grandfather who had polio. And there were the fact of actually vaccine mandates have helped a lot of people in a larger context. There's always that, there's always a little bit of irritation, we'll say, between the personal freedom aspect of things and then the larger societal aspect of things. And I don't think it necessarily needs to mean that people are being treated poorly. They will be treated differently, in effect. And if that, I understand the deputy mayor's concerns there, and I understand you not wishing to vote on it for that reason, is that there'll be a different treatment, and in terms of the language of equity, it doesn't necessarily follow through. But for me, on a larger scale, on the scale of the ability for people to live healthily longer, possibly, a needle in the arm 2 or 3 times is a reasonable acquiescence to that. So
Thank you. Councillor Carver.
Yes, I can certainly see the merit in the deputy mayor's comments. And it's leading me to wonder whether having a provision for a testing regime could be incorporated, or would how that might affect the efficacy of a policy.
Thank you. CAO.
Just a couple of things. I guess first off, to me, we're basically debating if there was some misinformation out there that said hard hats give you brain cancer. Somebody says they don't want to wear a hard hat. We'll say, go on the job site without a hard hat. Don't worry about it. This is employees and this is safety. So it's a pretty straightforward thing that we require employees to take steps to take their and the public safety into account. I don't think there's anything unusual about those steps being compulsory. Anything in our safety program is compulsory. I wanted to be clear that this is a policy that does, as I said, affect employees. It's not a policy into the general public. But despite that, we're not changing any of our protocols about working safely. We have distancing, masking requirements in all of our facilities. I think there's perhaps an understanding from people that, along with vaccinated workplace comes people taking more risks or cutting corners as far as that ability to transmit the virus. And, that's simply not the case. We're very cautious here with respect to masking and distancing, and will continue to be regardless of this policy's implementation. As far as the specific question about could we do regular routine testing, the policy actually does mandate the town to provide rapid testing kits to employees. And it is our intention, we registered with the province to receive some kits, and it is our intention for employees to be instructed to utilize those kits as part of a first response, stay at home, take your COVID rapid test. We've been very supportive of employees declaring that they are concerned that they may be sick. Maybe they're at a location where there's been exposure. Number of employees have kids in school. They've received warnings about a child in the classroom. In those cases, we facilitate remote work for that employee until they have a clean test result to come in. Currently, we're utilizing existing testing programs, but as they become less accessible, with the province cutting those back, rapid testing is going to be something the town uses. But I would oppose the notion of just arbitrary rapid testing. I think we do it when there's a cause for concern. So that would be my perspective as far as that question.
Okay. Councillor Feen.
I'm just thinking, kind of wrapping up the conversation, Mayor, that council's done, I think, a thoughtful evaluation about our fiduciary duty to both the people that the town serves, balanced against our responsibility for the employees that work for the town. And we're a small enough organization, and with a high enough percentage of the overall workforce that's customer facing or community facing. So there are very few, if not, I can't think of any jobs where our staff doesn't come into contact with the community on a daily basis, certainly on a weekly basis. There's very few places we were hidden away on the 4th floor where we keep the finance types. There are a couple of people, but few and far between, and they're out in the community. So, I do respect the deputy mayor's view, and I think that there'll be lots of thesis written about the ethical dilemmas that big business, small business, municipal governments. But I do think this generally aligns with the national and federal mandates, and I think really if you had to balance off our responsibility to the community and the employees, I do think that this policy tips into the balance of the community, which I think has to take precedence in these times. So we're in a unique situation, but I do think that primary responsibility is to ensure that any community member who comes in contact with a town employee is not placed at risk. And that, in my mind, is the slight tipping of the teeter-totter to the balance of the community benefit.
Okay. CAL and then Deputy Mayor.
I don't want to disagree with you, Councillor Feeny, but I also don't think it's as simple as saying that this policy protects the public from transmission by employees. What it does more than anything is it protects employees from transmission from fellow employees, because we're the ones who spend the most time with each other. So I think ultimately it isn't really a trade-off. It's a policy that protects staff and the public.
I agree.
Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, so I just wanted to make maybe a couple of things clear from my perspective. The reason I'm lodging the complaint has nothing to do with vaccine and vaccine effectiveness. I truly believe in vaccines. I think folks should get vaccinated. I think what I'm trying to put across is that othering from a vaccine perspective is not a good direction for any society to take. And unfortunately, the mandates have created that. We are not the ones who are studying it. It has already been studied. My challenge is my conscience, I think, will not allow me to participate in an othering process, and that's why I will not be supporting it, I guess, from that perspective. And just, I guess, to even further sort of mention where this is coming from, I guess, from a personal perspective, it's not very long ago we used to have Black people as slaves. They were the others, and there were very, very rational conversations back then why there were others and why there was even policy in place and things in place that made them the other. And these kinds of, I guess, societal moves need to be navigated very cautiously around the ethics of what we're doing. That's, I guess, one of the things that I wanted to put across there. LGBTQ community, there have been others for a very long time.
Irish people.
Irish people, there were others. So there is, if we can avoid othering and still do what we need to do to protect folks, I think it's important. So I fully expect that this policy will go through. What I just wanted to put across is I guess, a second thinking as to how can we get our communities to be safe without othering folks, because we can do it. It's achievable, it's possible. There are places where we don't have vaccine mandates and people are still active in the like. I will continue to insist and sort of say vaccines and getting a vaccine does not prevent you from catching COVID. You can still get it. It just, I guess, helps and protects the person and protects the community. The big piece is ensuring that folks who already have COVID are not spreading it further. And from my perspective, and I guess from how I look at things, testing there is very important, and to ensure testing is accessible and all that kind of stuff. I'm glad to hear that there'll be rapid testing kits. I think that's a good move. I'm just not comfortable with the othering piece of this policy place. So hopefully you understand where I'm coming from that perspective.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. You've heard the motion. On the question. All in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you. Let's go to terms of reference for the Climate Action Committee.
So, Mr. Mayor, this is another one that's back on council's agenda. We presented these, I think, a couple meetings ago now, and Martha had developed them based on the impetus coming from the greenhouse gas reduction plan, which council had adopted back in the spring, which said that we would establish a committee for oversight of that plan. And in the meantime, council had developed a strategic plan, which actually has 3 environmental pillars, of which the greenhouse gas reduction effort, mitigation effort, is one. And so when this term to reference was presented, council via the Policy and Strategy Committee and the recommendation through the council had asked staff to come back with a revised terms of reference that more broadly reflected the environmental mandate from council, not focused as much on mitigation, but to include sustainability and stewardship and broader environmental oversight. And so that's what we've done here. There's a little bit of change to this attached climate and environment advisory committee term to reference. So we changed the name as part of that, because then it's no longer focused simply on climate action, but stewardship, which may be independent of climate, but is one of council's environmental pillars. So we are recommending here that this be adopted in order to allow staff to go out and advertise for membership on this committee. And then once this is adopted, council may wish to consider council appointments on this committee, whether you want to do that tonight or whether you want to make that part of the next agenda. Give people time to think.
Councillor Feeney.
Just a couple questions, Mayor. I think this is another example, staff really improving it.
Do we have a motion?
I was gonna.
Councillor Burdick is making a motion. You second it? We have a motion moved and seconded, please, question.
So I'm just wondering if we think that the terms of reference are broad or robust enough in the language to include things like spray pipe, any type of potential issue around harbor cleanup, or something theoretical like a wetlands being affected by the installation of some telephone poles, something like that. And I was just, in my mind, I was hoping that with the benefit of having the community membership, supporting staff and some council members on this committee, that we would be able to get kind of some broad-based opinions to draw, that council could draw upon if we do end up in a situation where there is a discussion on something where there's an environmental concern, that this committee could help pick up that load. And I'm wondering if if everyone is of the opinion that this language is broad enough to let this and future councils know that committee would be picking up that mandate.
Okay, thank you. Other comments? CAO?
I mean, I don't want to step on council members responding, Councillor Feeney, but certainly that is the intention with the references to stewardship. We have established in the council strategic plan that stewardship of the harbor was one of those, along with wetlands and natural assets on land that were considered to be under that stewardship pillar. And then when you look down under the mandate, other than number one, which is which is specific to the greenhouse gas reduction action plan implementation, the rest of them are broadened to include reference to the various environmental leadership under the strategic plan. So it would certainly be staff's understanding of the terms of reference that any environmental items speaking to any of the three stewardship, adaptation, and mitigation pillars in council strategic plan would be the purview of this advisory committee to make recommendations to council. But if any members of council feel that there's anything additional needed, obviously we can make additional changes, but that was our intention.
Other comments? Councillor Kerr.
Yes, thank you. Just responding to Councillor Feeney's comments, I felt comfortable reading the draft policy that it would cover
those things.
Yeah, a wide range of issues. And then there's also the point of, as we go on, because this is something new, if we discover that we're tripping over something or missing something, we could revise the policy or the revised document.
Councillor Burdick.
Thank you. Yes, I think that even having the word environment in there, environment advisory, yeah, I think it does help a lot. I think that citizens will probably sort of see that and direct things that way.
And I just want to agree that maybe we should change the name of it to Environment Advisory Committee rather than Climate Action Committee, so that way it's all inclusive.
So we did kind of do that in the terms here. The revised terms present the name as the Climate and Environment Advisory Committee. And I think our intention, rather than switching to fully environment, was that, you know, we do want to respect that a key part of this committee's mandate originally, and I think it still needs to be, is in looking over the implementation of our greenhouse gas reduction plan. So wanted to leave climate in the title, but so that's our suggestion as a compromise, is climate and environment advisory.
Deputy Mayor?
Maybe responding to Councillor Feeney's comments. It's a comment and a question. Will it be helpful to include that, I guess, very particular language around the street pipes in the mandate?
Well, I guess my impression in reading it was that, great, we're going, this is much improved. I was happy about but I guess what I was thinking is that when we go to the community to seek the 5 community members to participate on the committee, I was hoping we would have as much of enthusiasm around harbor issues as we were around kind of global GHG issues. So we'd have a balance of influences on the committee. And that was really what I was thinking about. The good news is that people that are interested in one thing are generally interested in the other, but this is just as far as the emphasis of the committee. I was hoping that we would, I think we're all on the same page on what the objective is. I just want, this is really about how we communicate the terms of reference to the broader community. And I also think we may want to contemplate having membership of this committee be from the constituency of the greater Mahone Bay area versus just people who are domiciled in Mahone Bay. As we have a lot of that, someone from Oakland or Indian Point or who participates in the water, who are part of the watershed district. Those folks have just as much skin in the game, in my opinion, as someone who physically lives in town. I know that's a little outside of our normal protocol, but I'd rather have a very active, robust committee of interested parties. And if you have to go a couple hundred yards outside the town limits to get those people.
So the committee has got a very broad range of focus on what their goals are. The issue is going to be to try and find that broad construct of persons of interest to populate the committee, so as not to focus on a particular area. Councillor Carver?
Well, I'm really interested in the idea that Councillor Feeney has suggested of including people from outside the town boundary, outside our own little silo. And there's nothing in the committee membership terms of the section of the terms of reference that would support that. It's silent actually on where the public members would live. So, I mean, either we should specify that it's 5 public members, residents of the town of Mahone Bay, or up to 5 public members, of whom 3 must be residents of the town of Mahone Bay, for example. So given that issue has been raised and that the wording at the moment is silent on residency, I think we might need to correct that.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, Mayor, there's an overarching conversation about the committee membership, and I don't want to be a fly in the ointment if we're making progress tonight to hold this up, but having a representative from the watershed on this committee makes complete logical sense to me. If there's someone who lives on the watershed and this is an environmental issue and we're talking about salt washing off, we're asking the Department of Transportation to only sand the road, not salt the road. These are the kinds of things that this committee would talk about periodically. Anyway.
Perhaps we could put out a general call for persons to indicate an interest in joining the committee, but give preference to persons who reside within Mahone Bay town. Mr. Hyde?
So the committee's policy is not silent on this, and we generally don't try to have terms of reference covering the same territory. So back in the committee's policy under 5.0, what it actually says is voting members of town council committees must be residents of the town, owners of property within the town, or currently active members of stakeholder or community organizations as per each committee's terms of reference. So that opens up the opportunity within the terms of reference to cite that the public members may include non-residents of the town who are, in some identified way, currently active members of the stakeholder community. So essentially, that's what we did with the resident of the Oakland watershed area. Right. So that's a committee has an opening for, it's identified in terms of reference as being for that. or community organizations. So it may be that there are appropriate community organizations. The majority of voting members of town council committees must be residents of the town. So that is in the policy. So essentially what we need to do if we want to open the terms of reference up for non-residents is just simply activate this and say as an amendment, if accepted terms of reference as amended, to include clause permitting membership of non-residents who are, and you'll just have to determine stakeholders or members of community organizations. And I think I would need some direction from council now on how we would determine that. If it's stakeholders, is there an area within the boundary of Mahone Bay that is seen as being stakeholders within this process, or community organizations, I think is safe to leave as defined by an environmental mandate. And just so if somebody is a member of the board of coastal action, but they don't live in Mahone Bay, for example, that might be something that we would consider. So with a little bit of direction to amend the terms of reference, we don't need to change the committee policy, because I think it is good. The way, I know we had a lot of discussion when we brought that in.
I think in this regard, stakeholders could be anybody that lives in Oakland, Clearland, not necessarily, well, maybe Clearland even, and Maidens Cove, anyone within the harbor area, because that's gonna be one of the main focuses as far as environment goes, the straight pipes and that type of thing. But anybody that encompasses that direct area might be a stakeholder.
Okay. So what is are you proposing that we do an amendment, Mr. Hyde?
Yeah, if everybody's comfortable with the rest of the terms of reference and where we have already brought it back, I would say just approving as amended to include language allowing for public members who reside in, and then you just have, I don't know how you want to define that, if you just want to say reside in Oakland and Clearland, or you want to say reside in an area immediately bounding the town, and then, kind of leave that. It's really up to council how tight you want to be restricting of that.
And these would be voting members?
They would be voting members of the committee, but could not comprise a majority of the voting members.
Okay. All right. Deputy Mayor?
So just to clarify, as it stands now, we can, somebody who's not part of the stakeholder group, who's not in Mahone Bay, cannot be on the committee.
Yeah, as it would, unless there's any specification in terms of reference, you must be a resident of the town or owner of property within the town. So that distinction was made for all policies. So if we have a business owner who's not resident, we had determined that they would be eligible to participate. With all committees.
I think that this is an unusual circumstance where the very thing we're trying to protect, we share the asset with the other municipality. So like we have one harbor, we have people on one side of the harbor, the other side of the harbor, or we have the walking trail that goes through the municipality before it gets to Maidens Cove, and we have waterways that come through Modal before it gets to Mahone Bay. I mean, I'm just thinking down the road that there might be subject matter expertise that the committee could benefit from. And then of course we have the water supply, which is coincidentally in the municipality. So I just think given, without having a high degree of complexity here, I think we want to create some clauses that allow us to take advantage of people who we think could benefit the committee and coincidentally happen to live in those geographies.
Okay. Councilor Burdick?
Thank you. I feel like neighboring communities would be adequate to get that idea across, if that were immediately adjacent communities. I mean,
I would just generally say like areas of the municipality of the district of Lunenburg abounding the town of Mahone Bay. Because communities kind of immediately takes you quite a bit further afield, I think.
sure, yeah.
Deputy Mayor?
Yes, so I'm okay with that. I think makes sense. The other question that comes to mind for me, so if Professor Dahl, for example, who might have an interest in maybe for a year or two participating in such a committee, because they can provide some advice. If we craft it just that way, they would not be able to participate, right, as a committee member.
So that would be the second part where you say stakeholders,
Yeah.
covered, and then community organizations. So if we wanted to say, you know, academic or nonprofit sector organizations with an environmental mandate, you know, that would be a way to cover that as well.
Exactly, that's what I wanted to say.
So, but the majority of the public members of the committee
Yeah.
would be residents of the town.
Yeah, that'd still be, that's to all, because we can't change that without amending the.
I mean, in the case of the non-resident property owner, they are contributing to the financing of the town. And they would not have any say in how that money gets spent. Right?
Right, like think about an announcement from the province about a large salmon farming lease in Indian Point. You know,
Yeah,
it would be helpful to have someone at Indian Point on the committee.
That's not.
all right.
Oh, strings attached.
So we have a motion on the floor. Clerk, can you read us the friendly amendment?
Oh, can I read it?
I would really prefer if you did, that was plural friendly. amendment.
Can't write that.
So here's what I wrote, which I will email to Mo, that we add wording to allow stakeholders from stakeholders from areas of the municipality of the district of Lunenburg abounding the town or members of academic or nonprofit organizations with an environmental mandate to serve as public members on the climate and environmental.
Should that be abutting rather than abounding?
It can be a budding, sure.
Mover, do you find that
Very pleased, Mayor.
okay? And the seconder? Okay. So with
It
that,
was the other way around,
It
but
was the other
I
way
think it was the other way
around.
around, Mayor, but
with
balance is
that,
happy. Balance is happy, I'm happy.
you mean Councilor Bird?
That's right.
Okay. You heard the motion, you've heard the amendment that the mover and the seconder have accepted. All in favor of the motion? Motion's carried. Thank you. Let's go to solar garden consultations.
So this was a report provided at the recent area board meeting, and not all members of council obviously are on the area board. So Lenta with area had provided this to the different councils, just a little customized report to talking with the recent open houses that took place. And I was very pleased to note that Mahone Bay had such good attendance at our session. I think we went in, you know, really thinking 60 would be a great number in terms of our refreshments and that type of thing, and had about 100. So we actually had more turnout than the much larger communities. And take any questions if anyone has them, or obviously take them back to Lenta if it's something very specific. But it's just a good news update. There will be a further update on the larger solar project in the new year. But it's a
Councilor
step
Curry.
forward.
I thought they did a great job. I mean, the whole presentation was very neat and attractive, and they were really on in terms of their interaction with people. So I thought they did a really great job.
Well, thank you for saying that. I'll pass it along.
I thought the ink roll people did particularly well.
Yeah, I think, you know, this is not the first thing we've done with them, and I think they've proven up to the challenge in terms of the engagements we've used them for.
Any other comments? Okay, let's move on to financial condition indicators.
So this
Book of
is,
the year, bestseller, that one.
So it's getting longer every time. This it's really become a book at this point at 38 pages. This used to be kind of a one-pager, but these are the condition indicators provided by the province, and rather than adding any interpretation, they've gone to very great lengths to provide a preface, a lot of different community statistics before they get into the actual municipal indicators. But I am happy to comment on them, or if council would like to do more with this report, there's a lot there to discuss. Obviously, we may want to take another opportunity to do that. So any questions?
Councillor Kerr.
Well, I think it would be really good to have another opportunity to talk about it in more detail and a more focused discussion about it. And I'm not sure which venue would be the most appropriate, whether to refer it to the Policy and Strategy Committee or to consider scheduling a special meeting. I mean, there were several things in it that I have questions about and would like to know more and to reflect on. Or the other option might be the Audit Committee. So I'm just putting that out there in terms of other people's thoughts.
I think it would be interesting to hear the comments and observations of the Audit Committee. I just don't believe they're going to be meeting in the very near future. Could be able to offer those comments.
So obviously this document is based on, informal, formal feedback between staff and the province in the absence of having the audited statements.
This is the previous year.
Oh, this is the very previous year.
Behind.
Okay, fair enough. So I mean, I'm assuming, what do you think, Dylan? January, February, early February? I mean, I know you're kind of waiting with bated breath.
I'm this close to being able to give you guys the poll, the pick a date in January. We will definitely have that meeting in January. Whether we have time in that session to get into this, or whether this would end up going to the next one. I think the Audit Committee is a good place to, a lot of these indicators, when you do get past all the stuff about the community profile, the indicators do speak to financial management practices and how you get a green versus when you might want to have a red, depending on what you're talking about, what council's overall objectives are, is a good conversation for Audit Committee, I think, with the personalities, staff involved.
Councillor Feeney and then Councillor Kerr.
So, I think, generally a kind of a cursory glance at the information. I mean, it's still using the 2016 census and year-old information in it. So we may not be able to glean as much from it this round as we would have traditionally. But again, we're also, I think, only a couple of weeks away from the assessments rolling out, Dylan, and I think given what I'm hearing through the grapevine and informally, I think there would be a good opportunity for us to consolidate some of these conversations, which I think would be very worthwhile to build enough time for council, other than a special session sometime in late January. I think from what I gather, I think a lot of councils all across the province are going to be having special meetings about the outcomes of the assessments. And it really does dovetail directly with this information. And I think the assessment information is going to make this information look very dated and much less relevant in another month and a half.
Okay. Councillor Carver?
So I have in my calendar that there's an Audit Committee on February 17th.
Yeah, so our thought was that we would have had an Audit Committee meeting in 2021, and then that would be the first one in the new year. And by that point, we would no longer be talking about the new audit statements that have been produced, and we would be talking about things leading into the budget process. So what I would suggest is that we try to schedule the one that would have happened in 2021 in January, and then we go ahead with the February one as scheduled, and it would presumably be at that meeting that we would review this document, like presuming that we have the other one for the purpose of the annual presentation with Deloitte. And so I think that fits well with the budget. This would be a discussion to have before we get into the budget. And to Joe's point, we will have more public information from PBSC at that point as well.
And are you including the discussion at the Audit Committee around area financials in the 2021? That's an issue that's still holding over from.
If I can get some clarity from the people who feel it's still an issue, we'll put it on the February agenda.
All right.
I'm still, I'm not entirely clear what's being requested, but we certainly can include that in the February meeting.
In the February meeting.
Yeah, because the January meeting is the meeting for the presentation of the statements. That'll end up being a full meeting.
Mhm.
So I would say the February meeting, our normally scheduled pre-budget audit
Okay.
committee meeting would be the place for that discussion. But I would like some clarity before the day of the meeting as to what members feel they would like to discuss, because I think that was a challenge last year.
What the members of the committee want to discuss. at the
Yeah, if there's a
February
feeling
meeting.
that we haven't discussed the things they want to discuss, we just need to know in
Yep.
advance so they can be included on the agenda.
Okay,
So referring this to the February meeting of the audit committee, and somebody can make a motion to do that, just so we make sure.
So moved.
moved by Councillor Carver, seconded by Councillor Burdick, that we move this item to the planned February meeting of the audit committee, audit and finance committee. You've heard the motion on the question. All in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Okay. Let's go to fire services bylaw drafting process. A work in progress.
Work in progress. So staff have continued to work on the drafting of a fire service bylaw. We're developing some good connections with the fire marshal's office, with other municipalities. We're, I think, continuing to make strides in terms of putting the draft bylaw together. However, we have a couple of recommendations at this time in the continued development of the bylaw. Normally, when we go through a bylaw development process, we'll schedule a public information meeting. And from there, when council's ready to, we'll schedule a hearing. In this case, it was acknowledged that we have a stakeholder group in the membership of the Mahone Bay District Fire Department who need special consultation and involvement in the development of this bylaw. So the first recommendation here is that although we did have a PIM with the fire department members earlier in the fall, we are recommending an additional consultation session be scheduled with the fire department at this stage to present some of the draft clauses of the bylaw that are being developed and to kind of talk about their feedback from the initial session. And that would take place in the new year. And following that, if council approves, we would then be in a position to present a draft for first consideration for first reading. I know that it is not your standard process, but I just think it's important that the members of the department feel that they are a part of the development process and understand the relationship between the feedback that they've given us and given Maureen to this date and the draft that will be presented. And if we present a draft at council with no discussion of the clauses that are likely in that, I think we're setting up to have people feel like they're not being a part of the development process. So that's our first recommendation. And then understanding the time that this is coming forward, we are going to have some overlap with the normal appointment of officers that takes place in January. Our recommendation would be, because we do know that the new bylaw will establish a process whereby there's a nomination of officers to council who would then accept those nomination of officers and put those roles in place for the new year, rather than having the process go forward as usual in January, requesting that we write formally to the department indicating that the council would like the appointment of officers to take place after this bylaw has been appointed, which would require the current officers to remain in place a little bit longer. It is a tricky overlap of a set of procedures that the fire department has followed for years with the establishment of the town fire services bylaw. And there's bound to be some changes that are taking place and a little bit of challenge in terms of managing those changes. And our feeling at staff was the best way to avoid having some officers' names put forward and then not being in a position to, approve those or accept those, and creating a situation where people feel like they're in a kind of limbo, would be to ask the department to hold off on that process for the time being. So this is our recommendations. Love to hear some council feedback. If council is supportive, I believe there is still a fire department regular monthly meeting coming up on the 21st. My understanding is that the mayor and I would be invited to attend that meeting, and we could speak further to this subject there. So take any questions.
So when you meet on the 21st, I understood that the town was coming to present the bylaw to the fire department at that time. That was the word that we were given.
We're going to highlight some of the aspects of it, but we'd like a full session devoted to just sitting down with the department. So we don't want to hijack the meeting, and it's the 21st of December. What we'd rather do is have a session in January where members are coming out just to talk about the bylaw. But I do want to attend in order to be able to make sure if anyone has questions of where is this going, or what are we talking about here, then we would be present for that.
So when this bylaw was discussed, it was my indication, my thought that this bylaw wasn't actually going to try to control the management of the fire department, but more or less become a liaison between the fire department and the town, so that there'd be more responsibility as far as financial expenditures go and that type of thing. It seems to me from this here that the town and council are going to more or less take over the management by appointing the officers. If the applications are going to come to the town and town's going to decide who's going to be in there, then that's more or less leave the fire department.
I didn't think that was the proposal. I thought
That's the way I read it.
the applications would come in, that the fire department themselves would make recommendations to council as to who they would have as their chief and their deputy chief and who their captains would be, and they would be appointed by council as opposed to being appointed by the fire department. CAO?
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly, I think you're both right, Richard, in the sense that you understood that this bylaw is in many ways for the purpose of clarifying how the department members relate to the town financially and in other ways. That requires things like an understanding that the chief and officers are ultimately accountable to the town in the provision of those, in the performance of those roles. So the bylaw would define the role of the chief, the role of the deputy chief as accountabilities to the town. And it would provide for the membership to nominate someone to those roles and for council to accept that. And if council is by motion accepting someone to a role of an officer with the department as per the role as defined in the bylaw, then council setting for that individual, for the community, an obligation as to what that role entails. And that's something that we need to do in order to be able to provide a quality fire service, but it doesn't change the performance of that role for the individual with respect to the other members of the department. It just simply brings in the formal accountability to the town for the performance of that role,
So
which has always been the nature of our fire department, because it is ultimately responsible to the town.
Yeah, so we're going to do this for all the officers. We'll be the only municipality that I know of that does that.
I wouldn't actually say that we're confirmed that we are going to do it for all the officers. It's just that the process will be determined by the bylaw. And I would say council is not yet at the stage to presume what that exactly will look like. Yeah.
Councillor Carver and then the clerk.
Thank you. I'm glad that Mr. Hyde said what he just said, which is that we're not at that stage of talking about the bylaw because it's entirely theoretical.
It is.
And for that reason, I would be perfectly happy to support the first suggested motion, but not the second suggested motion. Because I think that the second suggested motion presupposes conditions of a bylaw which is not in effect, and it's entirely theoretical at this point.
Okay.
So I think it's very problematic to be asking another organization to defer its activities on the basis of a hypothetical situation. So
Interesting. Clerk?
Thank you, Your Worship. I was just going to clarify one issue about this is actually the notion of council acceptance, approval, whatever, of certain specific officer roles is actually very common in a town. That's one of the things that research has found because of the way the fire department works with the town as opposed to a larger municipality. So that's actually something that we found very common. We're immediately surrounded by a large rural municipality. That's probably a lot of the reason that this is not something you've encountered so far, but we are finding that that is pretty common. And as the CAO said, it really has to do with clarifying that relationship. And that's something we heard a lot from the membership that evening as well, that we had that stakeholders session was to say, we want to clarify what that relationship is. So it's really clear what everybody expects of everybody else. We want to have that solidified so that people know, someone's a volunteer firefighter, they attain a certain level of qualification, they attain a level of respect within the department, and they take on a role, and all of a sudden they get this big bump. And by the way, we need you to have a quarterly report, and we need to have all this. And so that is really where that comes from. It is just it's something that we're seeing be very common in towns because it does help clarify that role, that relationship between the department and the town, so that everybody knows going in up front who does what and what's expected specifically. So that's really where it comes from. It's more of a town model.
I think the town of Bridgewater is the only one in this area that does that. And they don't appoint their officers. What they do is the name of the chief and deputy chief are put to them, put to the council, and they approve it.
That's exactly what we're talking about.
So it's not an appointment, it's an approval.
That's exactly what we're talking
You
about.
know, so I can see that for maybe the chief and deputy chief, but as far as the other officers go, I'm not so sure that's necessary.
And as the
And I say Bridgewater is the only one that does that as far as I know.
Councillor Now, and then the deputy mayor, and CAO was on the list, and so was Councillor Carver.
Okay, so I basically said what I want to say with regard to appointments there. So so the bylaw is gonna go to the department before it comes to the town. Is that what my understanding is?
We would like to raise the, anticipated provisions of the bylaw with the department in draft form before presenting a completed bylaw draft for council's consideration.
Deputy mayor.
So I think based on what's in front of us, similar to Councillor Carver, I think I'd be comfortable in I guess passing the first motion. I think that's a good step. With just a small amendment there to sort of mention that it's not a draft that council has seen. It's a draft that staff has put together so that they don't have the understanding that we've had those, I guess, exhaustive conversations about the draft. And then I guess the other one is the comment or question around whether the second motion is really necessary at this point. We could always revisit that in a subsequent council meeting when we are at a place where we've seen the draft to know which direction we're going. So maybe for purposes of tonight, we don't pass that second.
Okay, CAO and then Councillor Carver.
So I had my hand up in response to Councillor Carver, but that's pretty on the same subject. So I think the alternative to the second recommendation is to advise the department that when the draft fire services bylaw is adopted by council, it may require new appointment procedures for officers. And I think that anyone standing as an officer, for nomination or for, I guess in this case, approval by the membership, because there won't be a nomination process in place, needs to understand that that is not going to stand once the bylaw is approved if it conflicts with the procedure that is currently being followed, which it will. It will no matter what, because the procedure is not very likely to be that the membership has a vote and council has no say in this process at all, and that the fire chief is determined without council even knowing who that person is. We need people to know that when the bylaw comes in, there will then be a new process. So somebody may stand for election, be elected in January, and then a bylaw be approved in February, and that invalidates the results of that election. So, I think people need to know. They don't need to be requested to hold off on the process. They could instead proceed understanding that that process may then be overturned by the bylaw.
So that can't happen. Like, we cannot allow a situation where the fire department membership elects a chief and council overturns it in February.
Because
So
they've created a new
No,
bylaw
no.
in February.
regardless, there's no scenario where that can happen. And I think as the CAO wisely told us one time when he was referring to Parsboro and the challenge of running a community and maintaining community when the fire department implodes, it's very difficult. So there's a high degree of anxiety around this, and I just think it's around our communication and misunderstandings on the objectives and the intent. I think it would be very unlikely that there would ever be a situation where council will refuse to approve the nomination from the fire department. I can't imagine that would be the scenario. If it comes up, it's a nightmare for everyone involved. I think we'd all agree with that. So I'm really reticent to support the second motion, because I do think we can alleviate the anxiety and alleviate the stress. And I think many of you around the table have obviously been hearing this. There's a lot of angst over this item from the department members. And it's going, if it hasn't bubbled up yet, it's inevitably going to bubble up. So I think in preparation for the meeting on the 21st, like, let's not poke the bear too much. Let's just have the conversation in a friendly, respectful way, and we'll see where we are. And if it takes us a year to get the bylaw approved, so be it. I mean, I'm a little more concerned about the dynamic of the fire department's membership and their response to their lack of understanding about the good intentions that this bylaw is purported to have. But we haven't seen it, and we haven't had those conversations yet. And I'd rather have them in quiet, managed meetings versus a declaration of, oh, I just want to let you know that if you nominate someone in your normal course of business in January and the mayor and council don't like it, well, we're going to impeach that person and put in our own candidate. That is not something I'm down with at all.
Okay, Councillor Carver, and then CAO, and then the bear, and then Councillor Burgley.
I would dearly like to for this conversation to stop at this point. I mean, about this topic, I would like to see us focus on the first motion. I don't believe that we're going to have a bylaw by February. I'm much more inclined to think we might have a bylaw in a year. I am not comfortable at all with the idea that council, us around this table, are having this conversation, which creates this sense of pressure. At the same time as we're saying we're trying to create this process that is very much grassroots oriented, grassroots meaning from the fire department, with the fire department. And for that reason, I would just really like to say, ignore that whole second clause and let's move on with the deputy mayor's suggestion of including a comment in the first motion, proposed motion, that this is a draft that is really only privy to staff and the fire department. Council hasn't seen it.
Okay, CAO, back to you.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on Councillor Feeney's comment that there's a lot of concern within the department. We certainly have heard concerns within the department as to what does the town have to do with the internal processes of the department. Ultimately, we have a lot to do with them. It's the town's fire department. So I don't think that the solution is to downplay the town's responsibility with respect to the fire service. I think it is important that we be upfront with the membership that they are working to provide a service on behalf of the town. It's a valued service, it's appreciated. What I've heard a lot from the membership is that they feel that their provision of the fire service would be enhanced by clear direction in the form of a fire services bylaw. So I don't feel that that is at odds with the membership. I think we just need to be clear on people.
I think I agree, but there's the art of persuasion is what we're talking about here. And we're talking about the political dynamic of how you bring along an organization slowly, diffuse anxiety, get everyone on the same page collaboratively and move forward. What I'm seeing is the opposite of that, and I would like it not to go off the rails.
Okay. And Councillor Now is next, and then Councillor Bird.
Okay, yeah, and just one last thing in regard to this one here. I don't see what the rush is if by some miracle or whatever, we pass this bylaw by February, March. There's nothing saying that we can't just implement it when the bylaw, when the election law comes about next year. I don't see why we would ask the department to go against its bylaws to make this provision for this year, because I don't think there's a big rush on that. We haven't done it for the last 100 years. And I know it should be something that's done as far as the approval of the chief and deputy chief go, but I don't think it's a big rush to have it done for this year.
Okay. Councillor Bird.
Thank you. Yes, I am in agreement that I think timing is one of the big questions here. And it's just a little bit too soon to demand or request that second motion. So I would definitely support the first motion so that we can continue that consultation. And then once things move along in a way that everybody feels like they're being heard and contributing, then we can move on. And it may happen at the time of the next election.
If I can cut to the chase, the chair would appreciate it if somebody would like to make the first motion.
Yeah, so I move that council direct staff to schedule a second consultation session with the membership of the fire department regarding a draft fire services bylaw that's been provided by staff at this point, and not privy to council.
Excuse me, Your Worship.
Yes.
My concern with that wording would be the fact that we do not have a draft bylaw. That's why we want to go back to the membership. It's regarding the development of the draft fire services bylaw. That's what that wording, the original wording was, because we want to talk about the development of the bylaw, not the.
I've just read what.
That's what the motion in here says.
The motion says, so. The only piece of added is.
Oh,
that-
maybe, yeah, sorry. So then maybe that was what I was, pardon me. Maybe that's what I was doing while you were speaking. Yeah, just to clarify, there is not, that maybe that would be the better wording then, because there is not an existence of draft bylaw that anybody can see.
So
Yeah.
maybe the motion that's there, but say regarding the drafting of a fire services bylaw. Because it really hasn't been drafted yet.
Yeah.
We've had some consultation with the fire department, and we want to have another session.
Is
Right?
that wording that?
Yeah, that's much better.
I wanted to clarify that there's not a secret bylaw.
Yeah, well, the way the motion says is that there is a draft bylaw which we haven't seen, so.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so
I'll second it.
there's a minor amendment that it's regarding the drafting of a fire services bylaw. Okay, the mover, seconder is okay with that? Okay, you've heard the motion. All in favor? First one is carried. We should really have if somebody wants to make the second motion.
No, we don't need to defeat it. We can just not make.
Okay, well, no, that's, if nobody wants to make it, to have a vote on it. And discussion will end on it until we're ready to continue. Okay, good enough. Well, let's go to the water treatment plant compressors.
So this one is a follow-up to a budgeted expense in the capital budget around compressors. We do still have one that's in service, however, the age of the two units being comparable, we know we're somewhat on borrowed time. In order to get better pricing and not have to go through this process again next year, we think it would be appropriate to go ahead with the purchase of two compressors. So we're asking council to increase the allocation. This is an expense eligible for the water depreciation reserve. So it would be a reserve funded expense. It would also be a reserve funded expense if we didn't do it and brought it forward next year. So we're just bringing it forward now, and with council's blessing to approve that, we'll be able to go out and get those compressors.
And this is out of the water utilities.
Water utilities depreciation funds, specifically for replacement of existing water utility assets.
Okay. Deputy Mayor.
So I'd like to move the council increase the 2021-2022 budget allocation for the purchase of the water. The WTP compressors to 20,000.
Okay, seconded by Councillor Burdick. You've heard the motion. On the question. All in favor? Motion's carried. Let's go to housing strategy development.
So I guess just quickly, I want to acknowledge a mistake in here, Councillor Carver. Thanks for pointing out to me. I was previously under the understanding that the needs assessment that was conducted by the Shack was done in 2016. I understand it was using 2011 census data, not the 2016 data that was conducted in 2016. So it actually is at this point 10 years behind us. And with that in mind, I don't think it changes most of the analysis and recommendations here, but ultimately the question that we're faced with is how the conduct of a needs assessment, which would combine both statistical and consultative information, is a component of the development of a housing strategy, and how council would like to move forward with the development of a housing strategy, which was slated to begin at this time, in light of considerations around the needs assessment piece and generally the context in which we find ourselves now. So the recommendation was specifically that we write a letter to the mayors and wardens councils in Windermere County requesting support for a regional housing needs assessment to be carried out in 2022, utilizing 2021 census data and jointly approaching the Provincial Department of Municipal Affairs and Housing to support this initiative, as it was indicated to us that they would be willing to do so. Ultimately, this does push the question off a little bit. Alternatively, as is noted in the report, if council is inclined to proceed with the needs assessment piece in the town, while I would still strongly recommend waiting for the census data to be available in September, an engagement plan could be developed to collect the consultative data with just Mahone Bay in mind. So the recommendation is that we first look at doing that consultation at the regional level, but that is certainly something we're looking for direction from council on at this stage.
Okay. Deputy Mayor.
So the province has promised to do a needs assessment for the entire province, and they've said that they're consulting with NSFM. Now, I know we've talked about
Sorry.
we've talked about the challenge that is in there, but if we take the province at its word that it will do that, and I think we need to find ways to pressure them to do it next year, so that it can fit within the goals of at least us and the town of Bridgewater. To a certain extent, I feel that we don't need to ask our joint, I guess, mayors and wardens meeting to get on board in terms of doing a joint assessment. That for me sort of seems to be the only way that this can work in a good way, rather than individual municipalities doing it. And if the province is getting involved, then you're having lots of different conversations. The ask that I would probably suggest that we do is thinking about the strategy itself, that rather than Mahone does its own strategy, that we do a regional strategy. And so the ask to mayors and wardens should be that they consider putting together funds to do a regional housing strategy. That will build upon the needs assessment of its done.
CAO.
So it's not intended as a counterpoint by any means, but I don't, to my understanding, the province has not definitively indicated that they would be conducting a needs assessment. It's been floated as something that they could do.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we were also told that they would be supportive of municipalities conducting regional needs assessments. So I think if we approach the province, whether it's individually or with the other units in the county, and ask that they support a needs assessment being carried out, maybe we say it that way, they can certainly respond and say, great, we're carrying one out. That's, but I think not to push that question to the province and say, we want a needs assessment and let them address the means of doing so. And I guess secondarily, I did not mean a letter to the mayors and wardens group. This is, the motion suggests a letter to the mayors / wardens and council, so it would be each mayor and council or warden and council understanding that this has been raised at the mayor's group, but that group does not have the ability to get this on the council agendas. So this is just 2 points, and I totally agree with you that the next step would be, if we have a regional needs assessment, undertaking the development of a regional strategy, and staff would certainly recommend that approach. It's just that if we don't have a common consensus around the needs assessment that would underlie that strategy, talking about development of a strategy leads immediately to a lot of confusion based on last time we tried around whether the needs assessment, are we developing a strategy now in absence of census data, or is there a renewal of that previous needs assessment work to take place? And I don't believe that, for example, the town of Bridgewater is necessarily on the same page in that respect based on previous conversations. I think we all need to really make sure that we are on the same page about what would be required in terms of a needs assessment. And then however we would approach it.
This would get us to that first hurdle point, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just worried that there might be a willingness to support the development of strategy without clarity around how the needs assessment is going to be completed. And that makes it very difficult for the units to move forward on the development of the strategy.
Deputy Mayor,
So thank you for the clarification.
haven't forgotten about Councilor Bird.
Then maybe I would suggest at least we, in the letter that we talk about asking for a joint needs assessment and housing strategy, so that it's not just one.
As a step
As a
towards
step
a
towards.
development of a regional strategy. I think that makes sense in the letter.
Okay. Councilor Bird.
Thank you. Yes, from a few months ago, I believe that one of the representatives, Onshak, who is from Bridgewater, had mentioned that that town was actually looking for support from other neighboring municipalities for on a regional housing needs assessment. And I think, but it was a little bit vague and not formed in this way. It was a little bit more casual. I believe I brought it forth to council at that time, but there wasn't much to do with it. So this definitely, I think there could be interest in doing that. And I definitely agree that that second part can be attached to this. So there is a goal in mind after we have, this understanding that comes connected to the census data, for sure. So I have a feeling that it will be received well, and it's sensible, so that there can be this regional strategy that involves those sort of shoulder communities and ways of building in areas that we haven't been able to so far, essentially.
Okay.
And I did reference what you reported.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, your name's even in.
Oh, gosh, I'm so sorry.
I ignored that.
Too many cookies, baking.
Councilor Carver.
Oh, I was waiting for Councillor Burdick to make the motion.
Oh, yeah. I don't seem to make motions. I often just forget.
Shall I continue to wait for Alice? For Councillor Burdick?
Oh, is that your gentle code?
That's the hint.
I will make that motion.
Okay.
This motion, thank you, Councillor Carter. Thank you so much.
With the amendment.
With the amendment that includes, so that council directs staff to prepare a letter to the mayors, wardens, and councils in Lunenburg County requesting their support for a regional housing needs assessment.
Strategy.
And with a strategy in mind, a housing strategy in mind to be carried out in 2022. Did you have a?
No, so I would say housing needs assessment to be carried out in 2022, utilizing 2021 census data, and further to that, join the town of Mahone Bay coming up, building efforts towards a regional wide housing strategy.
Did you say like census data, supporting the development of the regional housing strategy, and so just back to the, just insert a little, yeah. And I think say for jointly approaching the provincial Department of Municipal Affairs and Housing to support this initiative doesn't say who would carry it out. It just says that a needs assessment be conducted with the 2021 census data.
Yeah.
So if that's broad enough, maybe we can accommodate the understanding that some units may have that the province would do this themselves. And I just don't know whether that's what will happen, but I think it's broad enough that if the province writes back and says, great, we're doing one in the fall, then we won't have anything to, we'll just wait and get that.
Okay,
I'll second.
Oh, sorry.
seconded by Councillor Carver.
No, that's okay.
You've heard the motion. On the question. All in favor? Opposed? Thank you. Motion is carried.
Have some more letters for your signature soon.
I think you should be paying me $5 a signature. Okay, let's go to
I'm just
Deputy
curious.
Mayor.
I'm just curious as to the position, just to understand.
Oh, why I voted against the
Yeah,
motion?
you might have.
Well, I obviously prefer we stop revisiting these votes all the time, but it's for the same reason that I voted against the last time, because I think it's a waste of money.
To do the study.
Yeah, because we've been studying this to death for years and years and years. If we had all the money that was spent on studies in the last 50 years.
We could actually build
We
something.
could build enough housing and we're trying to help house everybody in Nova Scotia.
There you go.
I-
Okay.
And the strategy, please.
The strategy is pretty straightforward. We need to buy some houses, first you pour a foundation, then you start hammering nails.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you for that, Councillor Wilson. Let's go to the Fire Services Mutual Aid Agreement.
All right, we're moving along. So this next one represents the work of the MODL Fire Service Coordinator. I don't want to take credit for the development of this mutual aid agreement, but essentially Chris Kennedy was working to update previous mutual aid agreements that have been in place in the county with something comprehensive that brings the various fire departments and municipalities under one banner. I think it's a good draft agreement. It was pointed out to me in a question from a member of council that this references the town departments as being registered in the manner of a independent department rather than as some of the other ones are referenced as a body corporate under the Societies Act, or I think what is actually most technically relevant as a description of our fire department, which would be an unincorporated entity under the town of Mahone Bay. So this wording has been standardly used across the board, across different units. I don't necessarily think we need to go back to amend it, but it is incorrect in its reference to the Mahone Bay Fire Department as being incorporated by an act of the Nova Scotia Legislature and or the Rural District Fire Act of Nova Scotia.
We should make that change.
I think that was done, if you go back far enough, it was years and years and years ago, I think that was done by an act of legislature. It might have even been when the fire department was formed back in, the 1920s. So second 21 when it was first formed, but I'm pretty sure I've seen somewhere where the department was incorporated by an act of the legislature.
Is it anything you can point us to, Richard? I've never seen any.
I will look, but I can't guarantee anything.
Yeah.
But I just remember seeing it somewhere along the way that.
Okay.
Apparently the Vatican's got a lot of this documentation.
Somebody invented fire and then the next day Mahone Bay started their fire department.
Mayor, I had a question on the documents, page 10 or 12 with regard to the signatories, Mayor's Cove Fire Protection Commission.
That's gone.
I'm just wondering if I'm kind of curious about if that is required, how we facilitate this kind of conversation with that commission. Like what the process is, who those folks are, and
Yeah, it is kind of an interesting inclusion there. My understanding in this case is that, with the town being the providers of the fire service for Mayor's Cove, they are a contributor to, I guess we could say, the town district department. And as such, they're consenting through this agreement to the resources deployed on their behalf by the town being used in mutual aid arrangements to the other areas of the county. So that they would not object that the town, without their signatory, deployed those assets away from their area in the event that then something were to take
Left them
place in their
unprotected.
area. And we said, well, we were doing a mutual aid call and,
Is the act of obtaining that signature, is that something that you are facilitating, or is that something that's being facilitated by Modal?
I did talk to Chris about getting these signatures on here, and he was gonna wait for the town's okay with respect to the Mahone Bay Fire Department in the town of Mahone Bay. Probably should also wait for the town's okay before the Mater's Cove Protection Commission were to sign. And I doubt there'd be any objection to making sure that it was understood that if the town didn't sign this agreement, then Mater's Cove would not currently be in a position to also sign this agreement since we are their contract provider.
Yeah, I think as long as there's a friendly face from Mahone Bay, doing the communicating to the Mater's Cove Fire Commission, that strikes me as a better process than having the Modal lawyers take care of that.
Yeah, well, they would have been advised by Chris Kennedy because they have a direct relationship with that service out of MODL as residents of MODL. But that doesn't mean I can't reach out to them and say, the town has agreed and therefore we're going to sign it together because the town has agreed once we have agreed, at that time.
Just as an aside for that, I believe this agreement has in the years past been signed by most of the other departments somehow or other. We were never involved in it, but I think a lot of the other departments might have been involved in signing something similar to this within MODL. But just in addition to that, I'm fully supporting this, by the way. We sometimes call mutual aid from Western Shore, that type of thing, we was actually in the municipality district of Chester. So do we need to have some kind of agreement with them as well, or can we, or what's?
It does speak to the notion that ideally we would have a separate agreement with any areas of the municipality of Chester that are covered. And we can follow that up with the municipality of Chester. I know their relationship with their fire services is not exactly the same as MODL's relationship with their fire services, but I imagine that it's something
They do have a coordinator.
Yeah.
And, but I mean, we could extend this on forever and ever, because I know this is down this way where we've had fire departments from Kentville and those areas down here for fighting a major fire. So, I mean, you can't have agreements with everybody. But it's an understood thing within the province anyway. Nobody's going to refuse to come.
Okay.
I'll follow up with Chester with that question.
Does that need a, oh.
Councillor Carver? There's
So
a
there
motion.
is a recommended motion.
Somebody wants to make it?
The only thing around it is the definition of the fire department and whether we should be chasing down, obviously, if we can, any record, but in the absence of a record, changing the reference there or let that go. On the signatories page, it just says Mahone Bay Fire Department, which, I mean, technically, that's not even the technical name of our fire department, so.
Well, this document came from Chris, right?
Yeah,
So I think he probably would have researched some of that. Maybe that's where he got it, I think, from Home Bay.
I think it was just a copy and paste with the other, yeah, I don't know it was, yeah.
Pending clarification.
Yeah.
Of the,
We could just say
Like, that
approved
can be-
pending verification of the status of. the
somebody wants to
department.
make that motion? Councillor now? Makes it, seconded by the deputy mayor. You've heard the motion, duly seconded. On the question, all in favor, motion's carried. Thank you. Let's go to Councillor Carver.
Thank you, Your Worship. At the last meeting of council, we were made aware that there had been a discussion at the mayors, deputies, wardens, and CAOs meeting
Mhm.
of possible interest in establishing a regional anti-racism committee. And to that effect, I gave a notice of motion to support that. And the motion I am putting to council tonight is that council direct staff to prepare a letter for the mayor's signature advising the mayors of the District of Lunenburg, the town of Lunenburg, and the town of Bridgewater, as well as the warden of the municipality of Chester, that the council of the town of Mahone Bay supports in principle the proposal for a regional anti-racism and anti-discrimination committee, and that the town of Mahone Bay will include consideration of financial support for the implementation of the proposed committee in our 2022-23 budget deliberations.
Could you mention mayor from the district municipality of Lunenburg? I didn't hear it if you.
Yes, District of Lunenburg.
Okay. But it's the town of Lunenburg, you need to take district.
You've heard the motion, seconded by Councillor Wilson. On the question. All in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Let's go to committee reports. We have two, the Policy and Strategy Committee meeting that was held on the 22nd of November, and also the Lunenburg County Senior Safety Program monthly report. Let's do the Policy and Strategy Committee first. There's a couple of motions in there. Councillor Burdick.
I'd like to make the motion that council direct staff to prepare a public engagement plan for the review of the strategic plan.
Okay. Seconded by the deputy mayor. On the question, Councillor
Excuse me,
Burdick.
I didn't quite hear what motion Councillor Burdick was making. So
The second one.
I scrolled down too. But we could do the second, that first one second, just to mix it up.
I'll support the second one, Mayor.
Yeah.
We want to roll it up.
Okay, we're rolling in through that council direct staff prepare a public engagement plan for the review of the strategic plan. On the question, all in favor? Thank you. Councillor Burdick's a low scroller, is that what? Okay. Councillor Carver, did you?
Well, I'll make the other motion that council take the opportunity during the review of the strategic plan to review the alignment of the committee structure in relation to that strategic plan.
Seconded by Councillor Burdick. You've heard the first motion second. On the question, all in favor? Motion is carried. Thank you. And let's go to item 5.2, the agenda items for the upcoming meeting. Has the date been determined yet? We haven't been able to.
We do have that in the new.
In the new plan, the
Calendar
new
schedule.
calendar that's coming out tomorrow, did I hear you say?
It went to the post office today, so it may already be in some mailboxes now.
Good, okay.
Mayor, move that the next agenda of the Policy and Strategy Committee include transportation planning in 2022 and environmental correspondence from Laura Kerrigan.
Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Now. Heard the motion on the agenda for the next policy and strategy meeting. On the question, all in favor? That motion is carried. Next, we have the Lunenburg County Seniors Safety Committee. Anyone have any questions or comments on their monthly report? I'm watching you.
If I may, I'll just say that as of the end of this year, we are functioning with one full-time coordinator. We haven't been able to recontract with the part-time staff.
Mm-hmm.
So there may be some change in service, just so people are aware.
Okay. Is there any suggestion of increased mental health issues, particularly as a result of COVID and the extreme isolation that I'm sure?
Oh, yes, I think that the statistics that are showing that the mental health issues are increasing, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Okay. There's no motion there. No further questions. Great, thank you. And there's no new business. That brings us to the end of our agenda. Clerk, do we still have some friendly viewers at home?
We do. I just wanted to clarify that there was an amendment to the agenda that we're going to be adding to the session.
Yes, that closed session is, before we get to that, we have to see if anybody at home, any of the home audience have a question.
There are still people watching and there are no questions.
Thank you. Well, with that, we will say good night to the friendly folks who are watching from home. The meeting is now going to go in camera for discussions under the Municipal Government Act, Chapter 22(2). I'm not sure which paragraph it is in particular. But with that, we will go in camera and we will therefore entertain a motion to adjourn this meeting.
Usually
Motion
just.
to go in camera.
Motion to go in camera. You have to come back afterwards. Move